we're joined now by Sam McKewon on the Hurrdat Hotline. Sam, how are you this morning?
I'm great. How are you guys today?
Sam, what's up, man? You on the move or are you a little stationary?
I'm stationary this morning.
Nice. Got it all
In the
handled.
office.
So the Durham Museum, huh? That was I
Yeah.
caught that. Very, very nice. Now it makes sense about the replicating and can't be replicated thing again. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was a really good time, and we liked the team that we put together. And yeah, it was good. I think that team's going to end up doing a lot of good things in college too. And so, I think we had a good time putting it together.
Sam, as we get about 2 weeks away now from, not even 2 weeks away now from the spring game, they've got a scrimmage under their belt as well. Is there, from what you've heard and from what you've seen, which I know is limited to certain extents, is there a position group that you find is the most competitive on the team?
Good question. I think it's going to be. I mean, I think when you use the word competitive, you could mean a couple of different things. So I think they feel very good that they're going to play quite a few defensive linemen. I don't know that I would describe that as competitive. I think it's probably more cooperative than competitive. But I think they're going to play a lot of defensive linemen. I think it's harder to play more offensive linemen because, defensive linemen, you get them in there for 9 snaps. That's not always as easy with the offensive line. And so I think there's certainly good competition there for who's going to be on that front line, offensive line, especially interior. So there's some interesting competition there. There's nothing settled at running back. Not really. I mean, I don't think there's anything finalized. Gabe Irvin is still going to get a chance at the job, and he's not really, he hasn't done, I think, a ton. And so you've got a bunch of guys there where you're looking at things. And then, in terms of nature of competition, there's a lot of quarterback. I think everybody feels like Dylan Rail is going to emerge from that group, but everybody's getting an opportunity, So, competition can be defined a lot of different ways. Linebacker, I think there's competition there. So, I think you can define it a lot of different ways, but, there's competition all over the field for that team right now.
Hey, okay, so that got me thinking. That's a good question. I like the way you kind of framed that, and the answer was good, especially with D-line. I think that's spot on.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole competitive thing versus cooperative is a fantastic.
It's a good distinction.
Is a fantastic line of demarcation. Let me ask you this way though: is there a position group, and you can count corners different than safeties? You can keep the second level guys the same. Whatever you want to do to quantify the grouping, even if you want to use wide receivers and tight ends, although maybe you want to separate those guys. What position group do you feel like the bottom is as close to the top when you're looking at position groups?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, again, you define it by, are you going when you go all the way to the bottom, are you going to walk-ons, are you going to
you can you can keep it scholarship guys if you want, although there's a
quarterback.
Okay.
Quarterback.
Now if you're right, wouldn't that be, just think about what you just said. What if you end up being right?
Well, I mean, there's no way that I find it hard to give any other answer before Dylan Rail plays a game. How do you know? How do you know? No, I don't think you know. No.
Oh, I could see. Okay.
The game is played.
Okay.
I don't think how can you be so certain?
Okay.
And that's the part I'm trying. I feel like what you're going to have happen, because people have to create and sort of manufacture stories, is you're going to see people really build him up without having any idea what he's done in practice. We're going to watch a spring game. He's probably going to do some good things in that game, and we're going to like what he does, and people are going to run with it. And we don't know. We just don't know. And he could be Adrian Martinez, who had, I thought, a very nice through freshman year. It could be more difficult than that. But the question, we can't answer that question until they actually play the games. Do I think he's going to be pretty good? I do. But I don't think it's fair to put a lot of undue pressure on him. So I would say that that the bunching is close there because, do I think that Dylan? Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be pretty good. I think Danny Kaelin could probably go up and do some good things, so probably that area. But if we remove that area from the group,
because it's weird because there's only one quarterback and he wasn't even mentioned that has a conference win.
Right.
Or any starts at all.
Right.
I get it. That's a pretty. I like how you frame the answer because you almost can't debate it. Like there's very little pushback given the if you start with the supposition of we don't know what Real is going to be. We don't even really know. So short of fabricating what we want it to look like, that has to be the answer.
Right. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a tricky answer. If we're going with the scholarship players and we're just kind of looking at that, I think that where their running back competition is right now, you would almost say you've got 5 or 6 guys all competing. And so you've got Quentin Ives, you've got Dante Dowdell, you've got Irvin who's banged up, you have Ramir Johnson, you have Emmett Johnson. And I think at this point, any 4 or 5 of those guys could play. It's a lot like 2021 when Ramir Johnson had merged by midseason, but in reality, they cycled through 3 or 4 starters before they got to him. If you remember that season, they had Gabe Irvin, they had Marquise Stepp, they had Jock Yant. They ended up with Ramir Johnson, but that's not where they started. They had Sevion Morrison. He was the number 2 guy for a while. I use the right word here, fear that could happen again. They've got to find a way to get 2 or 3 guys who are really, really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I wrote about the NIL thing this morning with Ohio State is Ohio State has, 2 of the, 6 or 7 best running backs in the country. And one of them they had to buy,
That would be Junkins.
Yeah, he's good. He's a really good player. And he chose to go to Ohio State and share carries. It's not going to affect his NFL draft stock. If he had gone to Nebraska, he would not have been dinged because he went to Nebraska by the NFL scouts. He's already, put on tape what he's going to be. He just can't go to the NFL yet because they have a rule. And so what do you choose to do for that final year that you're in school? You're not going to win the Heisman at Ohio State because you're going to share carries with one guy, with another guy, and maybe 2 guys. And so you go there because they're willing to pay you to be there. So he's going to run for, 900, 850, 900 yards this year, and he's going to make $2 or $3 million to do it. And the challenge that Nebraska has, especially in this upcoming reality that we're going to be in, is does Nebraska have enough money to go buy a guy like that, or can they find in the recruiting process the guy that's worth that much money, and then they retain him for maybe less than it costs to go out and buy the free agent college running back? Because Judkins could help any team in the Big Ten, and he's going to the one team that didn't need him because of money.
Hey, let me ask you something, Sam. How do you this is for either one of you. How do you differentiate, like if the bottom is close to the top, right, which is kind of like the basic premise of socialism, and nobody's enamored with socialism,
right?
How do you not settle on or arrive at, well, if there's not a clear-cut this, then it says this about the group, right? Like almost an indictment. Because I think sometimes that's how we feel about the running backs, right? Like, oh, there's no separator, so therefore the position group isn't very good. And it could be something like, well, if everybody's about the same, that could be good as a whole. Like, how do you discern, regardless of the position? Because you may say the same thing about wide receivers. You may say the same thing about tight ends. Like, do you need a difference maker, or do you want quality of depth? And what's the magic? What's the magic marker where you go from, oh, it's a lot of good guys, but no great, to, man, that position group is really strong because there's no drop off?
Good question. I think that, again, referring to the time when you were at Nebraska, what you want is a bunch of different makers, who are, it's a deep group. And you got 4 or 5 guys that could be all conference. They just all happen to play for the same team. The challenge today is that's less likely to happen in the NIL era. They're going to, players are going to spread out unless you have enough money like Ohio State to make it happen. And so, what you really would love to see for Nebraska is a player who emerges who's really, really good. And then, as Matt Rule talked about last week, a guy stands out and then he brings somebody along with him. There's a player on the roster who elevates his play in order to match the guy who's, broken free. The challenge that I think Nebraska's had is for a variety of reasons, whether it's injuries or other things. They have not been able to have a player at that position who's really broken free for a couple of years. And I know they hoped that Gabe Ervin would be that. He got hurt. That's unfortunate. But, he got hurt. So they didn't have that separator last year. I thought Emmett Johnson was pretty good, but I don't think he was, great. And, so you have these, this is where things are at. Like, I think you want to have difference makers at the position. Simultaneously, you want to have depth. And I feel like Nebraska has some depth, but I don't know that they have an elite player. They might have an elite player at receiver before they have an elite player at running back. And so I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens. I think everybody would like to see that the running back position get back to where it had long been, which is a separator for Nebraska football for, 30 years. And it hasn't been probably since Amir Abdullah left the building.
We're talking with Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, do you think a position can separate Nebraska without anyone at that position really separating themselves? Like, if everybody in the running back room is going for, 4.4 yards per carry pretty consistently, but nobody looks like that one guy that, is going to show up on a Doak Walker watch list or whatever, right? Nobody's going for 1,000 yards, just a bunch of dudes that have good yards per carry and all rush for 500 to 700 yards. Can both of those things be true at the same time?
If you had three guys rushing for 700 yards, you'd
have
be
a pretty
really,
good year.
really
Yeah.
good team.
But can you have a group that separates without a guy separating within that group?
I don't know. I suppose you can, but I don't know that that's the scenario that Nebraska finds itself in now. So, yeah, like Georgia has good backs. Again, we're talking like if the question you asked, I'll give you an answer. And the answer is it's possible, but it's possible among teams that are a hell of a lot better than Nebraska's been. And so for Nebraska to get to that level, Nebraska has to get more players who are really good. And they can either develop them and recruit and develop them, or they can, for lack of a better phrase, buy them. And, one way or the other, you have to get players who are, all conference players, guys that are going to get drafted. I also wrote in the Rewind today, I don't think anyone from Nebraska is going to get drafted. The most likely player to get drafted may be a long snapper that they got, by the way, through the transfer portal. That's not where Nebraska wants to be. They don't want to be a program where guys don't get drafted and you have your top prospects, maybe one of your top playmakers on last year's team is trying to make the NFL as a special teamer. He ran a 4.7 at pro day. That's not what you want. Mm-hmm. It's just reality. You want guys that run 4.4s and 4.5s, and Omar Brown did that. He ran a 4.53, which is really good. And he may get a look as a result, but Nebraska just has to get more dynamic all over the field, and that's the player that signed with Nebraska's recruiting class that is the most likely to get drafted in this year is Luke McCaffrey, who played receiver at Rice the last 2 years. Luke is probably going to be a mid-round pick, and I don't put this now. Maybe Damon has a different perspective. I don't put this on Frost. I think Luke sent mixed messages when he was here about what he wanted to do and what he wanted to be, and I Frost didn't figure it out either. But I don't put it on Frost that he didn't put McCaffrey. He tried putting McCaffrey at receiver, and I think the kid I know McCaffrey went on something and said, they never talked to me about, switching the receiver. They played you at receiver. Mm-hmm. What do you mean they didn't ask you? They put you there.
Well, that was
So you
interesting
didn't wanna
because
play
if
there,
they never asked him, then why did he leave?
well,
I just,
I mean, I think,
do you know what I mean?
I mean, I think he wanted to.
It was just weird to put that out there like that, knowing it.
Oh,
It could it could potentially leave more questions than answers.
I mean, what do you want them to do? They put you at the position against Maryland in 2019. They're basically telling you, and that's fine. He can do whatever he wants to do and say whatever he wants to say. The reality is these are the kind of things that have stopped Nebraska up. They didn't have a running back in 2019 because Maurice Washington was a grease fire. So Wan'Dale Robinson's playing running back instead of receiver. Luke McCaffrey's hell bent on playing quarterback, even though he's not very good at it, and he ends up at receiver. These are two guys that they could have had at receiver that would have been probably would have helped Scott keep his job, and they couldn't keep either one of them in the program.
It's interesting, right? That's why I don't like to make sweeping judgments, or I try not to get in my glass house, right? So we're talking about the whole running back thing, and how much is the close being to the top not mean you're mediocre, and what if you could just imagine if Nebraska, and this just goes with my current thinking. I want to revisit the failures, but just imagine if Nebraska had somebody else that they could put in place other than Wan'Dale Robinson to run inside zone for 3 or 4 games during that stretch. If you could just get a serviceable running back to get you 4.5 yards, where you didn't have to play Wan'Dale Robinson so much at running back, the potential trickle-down effect that could have happened, whether he stays, whether that steadies Nebraska's offense, all sorts of things could have happened. But when that opportunity presents itself again in 2024, we better be careful about not being too dismissive if you don't have that clear-cut guy. Sometimes your strength can be in the numbers. You just have to wait and see what it looks like before you get in your feels.
Right. And I think you can, somebody can separate at that particular position. Sometimes it doesn't happen right away. Divine did that midway through the 2018 season. He didn't do it right away. He didn't start right away. The Eel did.
He forced them to play him. And sometimes it's just like that. So that's why it doesn't ruffle my if Coach Rule says, hey, you know what, we want to get, or Thomas, or whomever the coach says, we want to get all 3 quarterbacks ready to play, guess what? They're not smoke blowing to buy time. That's everybody's dream. You want to be able to have options. You don't want to be tied to one particular thing in a power conference like that. It's just, they're not blowing smoke.
I agree. Yeah, I think they need depth at every position. I'm sure they'd love options at every position. It becomes harder in an era where you haven't made a bowl game in 7 years, and so guys aren't sure what they're sticking around for from a win-loss perspective. And then I don't know. I think one of the reasons Damon's talked a lot about 1890 is because there's a clarity of impression from a new AD who doesn't know any of the people running 1890 and doesn't care, that they have to build up that operation very quickly to compete with teams like Ohio State and Oregon, or otherwise those teams are going to run away and hide.
Sam, we got beat by a team at home that had a second option at kicker, and we got beat.
Right.
So I will never be dismissive of depth anywhere on a football field, because you know what? This team that we can't stand right down the road had the stones to trot out a walk-on kicker for a game winner in the diciest of all situations, and they got a dub out of it. So, I want to be very, very clear here. We don't be that group that is too good to think you need depth across the board. You always want options as a coach.
And I think they have that. Like, I think they have options in a lot of places, and their operation has helped them to create, depth on the offensive line. I don't think that if one guy gets hurt, they're sunk. And so I think they have depth. in certain spots. I'm sure they want more at the receiver spot. So they have depth at running back. I mean, at the end of last year, Emmett Johnson was getting it done. He wasn't bad after two guys had gotten hurt and, other guys had gotten banged up. Emmett Johnson was still there playing football. They felt like they had enough depth last spring that they were comfortable with A.J. Allen leaving. It's just, you want to have somebody who really can stand out. I'm sure they hope that Dante Dowdell, they didn't bring him here to carry it 34 times next year. They want him to be really good. And my understanding is that he has the potential to be that. It's a question of consistency, being asked to be good when last year you really weren't asked to do that because Oregon had a couple guys ahead of you. Like all those things, those are the challenges that they have to. And the fact that the number one running back on the team is Gabe Ervin is not really ready. If Ervin were in practice, it might lift Dowdell's game, or if Ervin were more healthy. So, we don't know what Gabe Ervin is going to do. He'll come back. He had some moments last year. We'll see how he does this year. But, depth's important. So is outstanding play, like finding guys who are elite.
Sam, is it more important to have options at a position because you worry about, hey, maybe a guy's not playing well or a guy gets injured or whatever, kind of the way we saw at running back or at wide receiver last year? Or is it more important, like we've seen maybe with past coaching staffs, to have options so you're not tied to a guy who isn't about what you want to be about?
I think probably both. I think both circumstances are important.
Yeah.
You want to have depth at every position, and you want to try to, develop competition within a group that, again, elevates the, rising tide. So if a player starts to separate himself, everybody else gets better too because they see this guy's improving. And
that's where you hope you've recruited. That's where you hope you've recruited guys that's their personality. Because what the last little thing you kind of just threw in there as a throwaway, it might be the most important. Because especially if you're in a program where they're going to try to continue to recruit over you, you better be built where if somebody's setting the benchmark, you're a person that's going to go get it, right? As opposed to, man, I can't believe they just did X, Y, and Z with this guy. I'm in trouble, right? Because you don't want to be around those people,
right?
And you certainly don't want them around your program,
right?
Right?
I think that's very true. So you look, there's two players last year. There's a difference. Miles Farmer left the program. Omar Brown stayed. I think they probably are happy that Omar stayed.
You could make the case that that's a fantastic point. You could have made the case that at one point they're in the exact same position. It was all on how they handled it.
Yep.
That's Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, great stuff. We appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Good stuff, Sam.
That's Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald.
We get that stuff out of Sam.
Coach Kuhn from the Omaha Supernovas coming up next here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.